Bryan Kohberger's name was whispered in fear long before the world knew who he was, a quiet criminology student whose ordinary appearance masked the chilling reality that he had been living in plain sight, while investigators pieced together the fragments that would ultimately expose him. The town had never known such silence. After the murders, streets that once echoed with the sound of students laughing late at night became deserted, almost abandoned. Fear wrapped itself around every corner, and the shadows seemed heavier than before. Every face in the community carried suspicion. Every stranger became a question mark. People whispered theories in hushed voices, but none of them knew that the one who had caused it all was moving quietly among them, unnoticed. Bryan Kohberger appeared ordinary to anyone who looked his way. He kept to himself, went about his academic life, and studied subjects that made him seem like just another curious mind, drawn to the world of criminal psychology. What no one realized was that his fascination was not distant or academic, it was far more personal. He had a habit of driving late at night, his white car gliding through streets where most windows were dark. Neighbors sometimes caught the headlights passing, thinking nothing of it, unaware that the same car circled back again and again. It wasn't random driving. Each route was deliberate, each turn part of a silent routine he had built. It became his ritual, the act of watching and learning without anyone noticing. In the stillness of the night, his car became part of the background, blending into the rhythm of the town until no one gave it a second thought. The image he created in the daylight was different. He was quiet, serious, and almost invisible in classrooms or public spaces. People remembered him as someone who sat at the edge of gatherings, never really stepping into the center. That distance gave him cover. He wasn't the kind of person who drew curiosity, and in a community desperate to find answers, that invisibility was his greatest shield. As panic grew around him, he remained calm, listening carefully to every piece of speculation that floated through the air. To others, the murders were a horrifying puzzle. To him, they were a storm he had walked straight into, yet somehow managed to stand in the middle of without being touched. Investigators worked around the clock, but their progress seemed slow from the outside. They were gathering fragments, little details that didn't make sense when viewed separately. But Bryan Kohberger didn't know how closely his own actions had begun to intersect with those fragments. The late-night drives he believed were unnoticed were being recorded by cameras no one paid attention to. Cameras at gas stations, traffic lights, and small businesses. Each recording sat silently in a database, waiting to be found. Each pass of his car through those dark streets was stored as evidence he didn't realize existed. He was a man who thought he understood how investigations worked. His studies gave him confidence that he could avoid mistakes, that he could move without leaving a trace. Yet even in those early days when the world around him remained blind, the trail he left behind was already forming. It was faint, like footprints washed by rain, but it was there. And with each step he took, it grew stronger, leading back to him even while he believed he had mastered the art of staying hidden. Detectives knew the case would not be solved by a single breakthrough. Every clue seemed fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it into nothing. They began with the basics, combing through hours of security footage collected from all over the area. At first, the clips appeared useless. Random cars passing by, people walking late at night, the ordinary flow of life captured in grainy images. Yet among the countless moments, there was one detail that quietly stood out. A white car, its headlights cutting through the dark, appeared again and again. Sometimes it circled the block, other times it slowed near the house that had become the center of the investigation. On its own, it meant little. But when detectives mapped out the times and routes, the pattern was undeniable. The car did not belong to any of the victims. It wasn't linked to their friends or family. It was an outsider, present too often to be dismissed as chance. Investigators knew they had to move carefully. If they rushed, they risked losing the person behind the wheel. If they hesitated too long, the trail could vanish. Quietly, without alerting the public, they built a timeline, connecting every moment the car was spotted. The map of movements began to form a haunting outline, like a shadow that refused to disappear. Behind closed doors, experts in digital surveillance worked to extend the picture further. Traffic cameras in nearby counties, automatic license plate readers, and even obscure databases were pulled into the investigation. What seemed invisible to ordinary eyes became a vast web of information for those who knew where to look. From gas stations on lonely highways to parking lots at midnight, the same vehicle appeared, threading its way through places no one thought to watch closely. Slowly, the threads tightened, and the web pointed toward one man. For weeks, investigators guarded this discovery, never releasing it to the media. They understood its power. The car was not just transportation, it was a witness, a silent participant in the crime. While the public speculated about strangers or random drifters, the real suspect remained close, believing that no one had noticed. He carried on with his routines, unaware that his most ordinary possession had already betrayed him. The deeper detectives dug, the more unsettling the story became. The car wasn't just seen near the house on the night of the crime. It had been seen there before, days and even weeks earlier, circling like a predator studying its surroundings. The footage revealed persistence, almost an obsession, as if the driver couldn't let the house out of his sight. Every loop, every slow pass, every return became another nail in the coffin of secrecy. By the time investigators placed a name beside the vehicle, the town was still in the dark, convinced there were no leads. Yet the truth was different. In the shadows of databases and under the silent gaze of cameras, the suspect's movements had been captured and stored, waiting patiently until someone connected them all. What had seemed like random fragments were beginning to speak the same story, a story that pointed directly at Bryan Kohberger, even though he still believed he was safe. The search for answers pressed forward, and even as investigators followed the trail of the car, they knew it wasn't enough. A vehicle could be explained away, borrowed, or misidentified. They needed something stronger, something that would link the killer directly to the crime scene. Inside the evidence room, among hundreds of collected items, there was one small piece that seemed insignificant at first glance. It was fragile, easily overlooked, but once examined, it revealed a clue far more powerful than any camera could capture. It held traces of DNA, faint but undeniable, left behind where the killer had been certain no trace remained. The sample was partial, incomplete, but science had advanced far beyond what many suspects imagined. Traditional databases returned no immediate match, which might have given the suspect a false sense of security if he had known. Yet detectives had another option. They turned to genetic genealogy, a method that had quietly transformed investigations in recent years. Analysts uploaded the profile into specialized systems that searched for relatives, distant or close, who had also had their DNA processed. The results were not direct, but they provided a crucial starting point. From those distant relatives, a family tree began to take shape. It stretched across generations, linking names, locations, and histories. Piece by piece, branches narrowed until one path emerged that fit the right age, the right location, and the right background. The tree pointed toward Bryan Kohberger, a man who had seemed invisible until the science of his own bloodline exposed him. He had been careful in so many ways, calculating every step, but this single oversight unraveled his efforts. The fragment of DNA he thought was too small to matter became the foundation of the case against him. Even then, detectives refused to rush. They knew the strength of their evidence depended on patience and precision. The genealogy work gave them a direction, but not yet the final proof. They studied Bryan's background, learning his habits, his studies, and his movements. Each discovery added weight to their growing suspicion. His fascination with criminology and his deliberate routines seemed almost mocking, as if he believed knowledge of criminal behavior would shield him from detection. But knowledge could not erase biology, and the trace he left behind tied him forever to the scene. Investigators carried the knowledge in silence, watching as the suspect lived his life without realizing the trap was closing. What made the situation so haunting was the invisibility of the evidence. No neighbor, no friend, no classmate could have guessed that something so microscopic, invisible to the naked eye, had already begun to seal his fate. While the town remained restless, searching for answers in rumor and speculation, the real secret was locked inside a vial in a lab, where machines quietly confirmed the truth again and again. The car had drawn suspicion, but DNA transformed suspicion into certainty. What began as a faint shadow was now a solid outline, a shape that could not be ignored. The mistake had been small, but it was enough. From that moment on, Bryan Kohberger's name was no longer just another possibility. It was the focus of the hunt, and nothing he did could undo what his own biology had revealed. With the family tree pointing directly toward Bryan Kohberger, investigators shifted their strategy from analysis to surveillance. They could not afford to confront him too soon, because a single misstep might allow him to escape or destroy critical evidence. Instead, they watched from a distance, carefully observing his movements and waiting for the perfect opportunity to confirm what the science had already suggested. Teams followed him through city streets, monitoring when he left his apartment, when he drove his car, and even when he shopped for groceries. Each routine task was recorded and studied, not because it seemed suspicious on its own, but because it helped build a picture of the man they believed was behind the crimes. Agents were patient, even as the pressure to act grew heavier. They knew the public was demanding answers, yet the case required precision. Quietly, they began collecting the things most people throw away without thought. Trash became their target. Discarded cups, packaging, and other items touched by his hands. In those scraps lay the proof they needed. A piece of garbage taken from outside his family's home provided exactly that. When tested, it carried his DNA, and the results aligned with the partial profile found at the crime scene. The connection was clear, undeniable, and chilling. Even with the match in hand, investigators did not move immediately. They wanted to see what he would do, how he would behave under the weight of an investigation he did not yet know was closing in on him. Would he flee? Would he slip and reveal more of himself? For weeks, they watched in silence as he carried on, his life appearing ordinary, his manner calm. To neighbors and classmates, nothing seemed unusual. But to the investigators, every trip he made, every object he touched, every quiet moment of his daily routine was another chance to confirm what they already believed. The surveillance stretched into the late hours of the night. Teams tracked his car as it moved along dark highways, the same way it had on the night of the murders. They noted how often he drove without any clear destination, looping through areas like a man restless or searching. His habits revealed a pattern, one that mirrored the evidence collected in the early stages of the case. Each observation deepened the certainty that they had the right person. What made the surveillance most unsettling was how ordinary it appeared on the surface. He ate meals with his family, scrolled through his phone, and walked in and out of stores like anyone else. There was nothing dramatic in his behavior, nothing that gave away the storm gathering around him. And yet, beneath the ordinary exterior, investigators saw the outline of a man who had made a critical mistake. His attempts to remain invisible had failed, and the truth was tightening around him with every passing day. The silence of the watch was its own kind of tension. The teams knew that at any moment the order could come to move in, to bring the long observation to its end. But until then, they waited, certain that time was on their side. Every hour he remained unaware was another hour that strengthened the case against him, another hour that confirmed the patience of the hunt would deliver results. When the order finally came, it was swift and deliberate. The weeks of careful planning, of watching every step and collecting every fragment, had all led to this moment. In the early morning hours, law enforcement moved into position outside the family home where Bryan Kohberger was staying. Snow lay across the ground, muffling the sound of boots and vehicles, turning the operation into a quiet march. The town still slept, unaware that the person who had cast such a long shadow over their lives was about to be taken into custody. The house stood still in the cold, but inside it, the suspect had no idea that the silence outside was the sound of his world closing in. The arrest itself was sudden, leaving no room for reaction. The suspect, who believed he had studied crime enough to outwit investigators, was confronted with the reality that he had been under their watch for longer than he imagined. His car, his movements, his discarded trash, and above all, the microscopic evidence of his DNA had betrayed him. The confidence he had carried, the calm way he lived his days, collapsed under the weight of facts too heavy to escape. In that single moment, the illusion of invisibility shattered. News of the arrest spread quickly, but what the public first heard was only the surface of the story. Many believed it was a sudden breakthrough, a lucky discovery that had led authorities to the suspect. The deeper truth was far more intricate. He had not been caught by chance. His capture had been the result of patience, technology, and a relentless search for the smallest mistakes. The car looping through the streets, the DNA fragment almost left behind unnoticed, the quiet surveillance of his daily life. All of it had been stitched together into a net that closed tighter with each passing day. What shocked people most was how close he had been all along. He lived among them, walked the same streets, stood in the same stores. The danger they imagined as distant had been right beside them, moving unnoticed. The idea unsettled even those far from the crime scene because it revealed how easily a mask of normalcy could hide something much darker. Yet it also revealed the power of persistence. No matter how carefully he tried to erase his tracks, every action left a mark. The story of his capture was not about a single clue, but about the accumulation of details, each one insignificant alone but powerful when connected. His downfall was not dramatic, not the result of a sudden confession or an accidental slip of words. It was the steady, methodical work of investigators who refused to let shadows deceive them. In the end, the truth emerged from the very things he believed would protect him. The arrest marked the end of a hunt, but it also left a haunting reminder. Secrecy is fragile, and what seems hidden can be exposed at any time. The silence he trusted became the silence that betrayed him, and the walls he believed were protecting him had been transparent all along.